I wasn't expecting so much conversation about confidence and how to conduct yourself and how to hold yourself. It was nice to get that because I think it's so valuable. Somebody out there needs to hear that so that they can apply it to their own life.
And yeah, I mean, I feel like we need to hear it even. I like it. That had an impact on just the way that I feel like I'm going to pursue my work in the short term, you know? It's a really good reminder to trust that intuition.
And it's good to hear it from someone who came from less privileged position than, let's say, kid of the designers growing up in California and going to College of Arts.
Yeah, we talked about that before you joined, about how she found design, and it was kind of a lucky happenstance. And just considering like how many people probably missed out on design that could have been great designers, but they didn't know what to go to school for. They didn't know there was a word for it, training for it, and what have you.
Yeah, or maybe got discouraged somewhere by like CAD or sketching or just some really like helpful skill to our profession, but not the core of what we're trying to accomplish, you know?
I mean, it's interesting because she had a lot of skills craft-wise before starting design school in a way that, like, well, this is just all the pieces lining up. But that's none of those things are truly the barrier. It's the thinking and the drive to solve problems and a sort of like systemic way of viewing things. And I can totally understand. I've heard from so many people, like when she was burnt out on biomedical research, that like that's a grueling field. So still kudos to anyone that pursues that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe they find more connection with it, you know, like more reason to kind of go through the grueling part because it actually fits some other element that feels more like the right answer for her approach. Reminds me of Anna's approach, where it's like, I know I have these problems to solve, and design is just this thing that I finally found that's like one of the billion tools I have to solve these problems, you know? It's such a awesome way to end up in this profession because you know that your motivation is solid.
Right.
And I think that's why she continues to have such a backlog almost of ideas that she knows would be really, really helpful to implement. She's kind of been like collecting them for years and just now has new tools to start like plugging those holes.
Mm-hmm. It was also a great part of conversation to learn more about native tribes. And for example, how the dynamic looks when she moved to Alaska to join her husband's community and how she had to earn the trust and become adopted by them. It wasn't a no-brainer that she just joins it. There is so much she has to learn and so much she respects about the new place and new community.
She's so intentional about culture and community in a way that, like, I think I don't feel like I've participated in community like that. I was like, I'm just here in the Pacific Northwest. I was like, guess I'm a Pacific Northwesterner. And then I went to college at UW. Like, guess I'm a Husky. And then I'm working at Fluke, and it's like, guess I'm a Fluky. Like, I don't think about doing these things intentionally. It's like I walked up to a group and I said hi, and then they smiled, and we're good. We're a community. I didn't feel like I put work in like that.
Well, I mean, this, Ginger, like you're creating this.
Okay, that's true. I forgot about this one.
Right?
Maybe I put some work into this one.
Just a bit.
Hey everyone, we've got another exciting episode of Beyond Ray lined up for you today. We're all coming from different parts of the United States. I'm still here in Seattle. Kate is joining us while on the road in Utah, and Margaret will be joining us a little later. We're excited to introduce Brittany Gene, a native designer based in Alaska right now. We met her at IDSA Women in Design Deep Dive in Chicago, and we're thrilled to invite her to the podcast to tell us a little bit more about her work. She's got her hands in many different design projects at the moment, and I'll let her tell us a little bit more about herself and her projects.
Okay, thanks everyone. Let me just first say thank you for having me here. Brittany Gene kia ani nishla tohe klini bashishi totsani ada shiche patani ada shanela. That's my intro in Navajo. It's kind of customary to start so you guys know my clans and where I'm from. I'm originally from the Navajo Nation on a place called Indian Wells, Arizona. But now I currently reside in Juneau, Alaska, with my husband, who's a designer. But a little bit about me, my background is in industrial design, but I call myself a designer in general because I do work in a lot of areas of design. And I know that drives past professors, a lot of different people crazy, but you have to understand that I come from design from like a native perspective. And so a lot of what I do just meshes and comes together because the community needs different resources and different me to wear different hats. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
When did you start seeing yourself even as a designer in title itself? Like, presumably you've always kind of been creating, making, fixing things, you know.
Ooh. Oh, that's a great question. That's a hard question. I had to sit with that. I would say probably early 2019 is when I actually started calling myself like confidently a designer, not just like, oh, I design, but like, hi, my name's Brittany. I'm a designer.
And what was the impetus? Like, what was happening at that time?
I had started my graduate program. I had been several months in, and the reason I remember this is because I worked on a project where I had to start calling the shots. And I couldn't just kind of be like, oh, I'm a student or, I'm a maker. I had to fill out my own W-9s. I had to fill out all my own paperwork and I had to put the title designer. And it was with a project with the American Indian Graduate Center. I think they're now known as Native Forward, but they had a contest for someone to design a blanket for their 50th anniversary. And so out of nowhere, I was like, let me just apply. Let me just try my luck. And I was selected. And from there on, I had to be a little more confident in myself because I started taking on more contracts as an independent designer.
Got it. So it sort of is like when the world was asking of you like how you needed to be labeled, and you're like, okay, I guess I can finally like use this. Does it feel authentic to you these days?
Yes. In a lot of ways, especially when I go to places like Women in Design, it feels more authentic. It feels more comfortable. But at the end of the day, I still feel like someone who just makes things and solves problems.
It's interesting because I was reading your interview with IDSA. So you actually came from a biology background, right, for your undergrad, and then you went back for postgraduate design, and that you felt drawn to making and to the tradition of craft. So can you talk a little bit about that feeling of like biology, healthcare, and the things that you initially thought about what you were going to do, or like not doing it for you, and how you decided like design is going to be where I tried to make an impact?
Yeah, I was in there. I sat for the MCAT. I got accepted to PA school, which I declined. And they called me and said, are you sure about this? And I said, yes. And I remember the girl saying, okay, so what are you going to do, just out of curiosity? And I said, oh, I'm going to be an industrial designer. And she is like, what? She kind of gave me that remark. But I actually started in medicine and in like biochemistry and chemistry because I really, really love food, nutrition, and science. I love science. I love that, like thinking through processes, and I love just that that step-by-step understanding of problem solving. However, in practice, when you are in a clinic, it is very, very different. I worked 2 years as a clinical care coordinator, and I just found myself fixing the otoscope. I found myself redesigning databases. I found myself constantly working as a designer. And at the time, I didn't know what that was because I knew design more as like a craft for my family. I knew it from how to sew soft goods. I knew it how to bend metals from, metalworking, carpentry. I knew all these things, but I never thought it was like design thinking or designing in practice without like the materials. And so it wasn't until like years later that I melded those two. I quit like medicine in my hopes because I was really burnt out and really tired. And I no longer wanted to be like a cog in the system, but I wanted to fix the system. That I was like, okay, I need to go back to school and I need to figure out what this is I'm doing because it's something and I know it has a name, but I hadn't figured it out yet.
How did you figure it out? Like, was someone able to help you and tell you, or were you just like searching like mad?
Okay, this is like a great story of my life. I quit my job at the clinic. I was super burnt out. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to do it. But my friend Jared Yazzie from OXDX invited me to be his like social media person. This is like 2016 for Native Fashion Now in Portland. And so I went and people kept saying, you need to like, whatever you're doing, because I had been creating and sewing for him and helping him style his brand. And he said, people kept saying, you need to do this. You need to do this. Did not know what it was. And at the time I was working at a wine bar, I think, to, make ends meet.
Sure.
But we met a girl, her name still is her name, Lacey Trujillo. who works at Nike as a footwear designer. We just kind of met her on the internet and she was like, I'll pick you guys up and I'll show you around. Come to find out, she was actually the younger sister of our good friend who we went to college with. And that's how she knew us. But she started working at Nike at that time. And so she took us on like the campus tour, walked us around and asked what we did. And she was kind of like, why don't that's like industrial design. Like, why haven't you done this already? Like actually made it formal. And so that was kind of my way. She was actually the pathway to my program and how everything had started for me. Like formally, when I started being like designer is what I am.
Wow, that's so interesting. I did not go so far down the path as you to like actually work in medicine, but there was something about biology in general that really intrigued me too, and definitely like what I gravitated towards for the first few years of college. But then it didn't fit. Like I felt like I worked in a lab and a lot of the connection between the problem solving, like big thinking systems, like learning that you have to learn to understand all the systems in the body didn't match with like the repetition and just sort of simplicity of lab work to me. And so then I similarly was like very confused about why this like part of my brain didn't really like fit with any of the professions that I felt like came out of the like biomedical world. And I had like, a conversation with this woman that was doing design, and she just was talking about a project, and I like zeroed in and I became so obsessed with it. And just like knew absolutely to the core that that was already the thing that I like did and loved doing and should do professionally, but had never connected the dots. Did it feel like everything kind of landed for you too? Like, was it a very aha moment or not so much?
It was extremely aha. It was like once I landed and like went to my first classes and like actually had the theory, the discussions about like what design is. I was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Doesn't everyone think this way? I know it sounds bad, like, oh, I'm a know-it-all, but it just really clicked with me, just like the whole process and the thoughtfulness of making.
There's so many designers I know that it's really like, it's a core way of being. Like, I feel we're very lucky people in how aligned we are with our profession, because it's actually like, it's just inherently like really the way that I think a lot of us see the world or like to move through it or how we approach problems. Yeah, I love that story. That's very cool.
That said, I'm so curious. Like, you came to design with a ton of craft skills and a way of thinking that is so in line with solving big problems and thinking in systems and that sort of drive to do that. But you didn't know about design initially, and like how many people have been kind of missed because our discipline is sort of niche, right? And how else are we gonna like get the right people into this discipline? They can't all run into Nike campus tours.
Totally. I know that at least on the Navajo Nation, there are some like the Nike tour person, Lacey. I know she goes back home to try to give presentations about this. And I actually do some work with students in the Phoenix area to help promote this profession. But one thing I had come across like 2 days ago was that there was an MIT class who actually, like a first year product design class, who partnered with Diné College first year students as well. And it was really amazing to see that mesh, because some of those students on Diné College, for maybe people who don't know what Diné College is, it's like a tribal college on the Navajo Nation. They actually partnered. And I noticed that the MIT students were very, very like dedicated to the process. Like, this is how we do it. Here's our theory. Here's our process. But when it came down to questioning, some of the teachers had asked, like, how do you know what pipe to use? How do you know what to do when farming this land? A lot of the students were stumped. And then the Diné College students came in and they said, oh, well, for this plot of land, we use the ABS piping that's 20 feet by 6 diameters. Like, they had lived knowledge. So it's like, how do we get in touch with those like students or upcoming students who do have that lived knowledge? Because like, you can't get that just from like a classroom. So I kind of on that sentiment would like to know how we could get this word out there as a profession to other students.
I think kind of in the same vein, like this idea that people need to bring their lived knowledge and background to the discipline. How does your identity and heritage like play into you as a designer, and how did you know like they have to be together and like you kind of can't extricate them from each other?
I think maybe because my first teachers were within my family or like people of my culture. Like, I remember being like, I don't know, like second grade, third grade with my grandma all summer. And she was teaching me how to build a fence out of reclaimed like wood and old wire, and how to use the mechanics of how to keep a fence post up, and or like having to build scarecrows as like a little kid. Just the need to survive and to like live was what design was for me at that age. So I think that's where it first came from. But I think it's different for everyone, you know?
Can you imagine a program? Yeah, like what would it look like differently if we started with the technical know-how and all of the hard skills, basically, that you're saying you and other kids that grow up in your community have, and then like build design education off of that, as opposed to having it be the last piece a lot of the time?
I think we'd have more confident designers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hear imposter syndrome so much from across the design board. And I feel like some of that comes from like the anxiety to learn how to sketch. Like you need to have a perfect sketch. But I've talked to a lot of people about sketching and like skills. And a lot of what design is like communication. And I always think of sketching and making as like a communication practice. And so, yes, while it's super important to have like really great images, I think the communication aspect would be like more important to some extent. So if you had those students who already knew how to communicate and felt confident about it, I think we'd have a lot more confident designers.
More practical too, right? Like I think there is sort of a disconnect sometimes when designers get out of design school, and then try to make real world products versus the students that you have encountered are, really coming from like a way more logical place.
I've kind of been dancing around how do I like bring this up, and I'm wondering if some of that skill gap and what's happening with the anxiety of like, can I communicate this thing, or like, what am I supposed to do as a designer? How do I do this well? Versus just going and doing something, figuring out the engineering of it, or learning as you go for the practicality of like, I have to make this. I need to put up a fence, or I need a scarecrow, or whatever it is. Is there kind of a privilege issue with who's going into design programs, or in general, perhaps who's going to secondary education in college, right?
Totally. I think there is a lot of disconnect in that way. But again, how do you change this whole system that we're already in, right?
Yeah, I don't know how we would break that down, because like someone can't help that they didn't need to do certain things before they got to college, right?
Right. But I think, a little bit in the lecture that Brittany gave us at the deep dive too, though, it's like, yeah, maybe that student can't help it, but they should be positioned to learn a lot more from the people who have had that lived experience, right? As opposed to the lived experience being downplayed or like less significant in the schooling system.
Right. Like as it is now, I think the curriculum, the design programs, there's a design thinking centric curriculum, but that's not, as you talked about in that lecture, it's not really like applying evenly to everything, and that there's ways where design thinking is failing, particularly like a non-Western centric perspective, a non-Eurocentric perspective, is that maybe holding up some of these structures that makes it harder for people to learn from these other outlets that aren't seen as official or as credible. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I think it gets down into that. You were talking a little bit about like people seeing something as craft and art versus design. Like how do we change some of that thinking?
Totally. Something I think about a lot is the fact that I think about zombie apocalypse all the time, especially with like The Last of Us being here. I don't know why, but I think about that way often. Have you guys seen The Last of Us?
I started it. I haven't finished it. I really want to finish it soon.
No. But apocalypse shows have been popular in general too.
Right. And I did this art piece in 2019, and it's basically me. I use my own imagery, so because I know I won't sue myself, but it's like a picture of me, and I call it the Repatriator, and there's all this like chaos happening behind me. And it's basically, those sci-fi novels in the 50s where it's like invaders from the sky, and it's like just this really graphic version of a book cover. Basically, I made that about like existing as a Native person, because this kind of world we're living in, where we're talking about like pandemics and all these crazy things that are happening, they've already happened to Native people in that way. So when I think about the need to learn and the need to like progress, I always think about it from a way that like, oh, we've already encountered that. Like, oh, we already have a solution to that, because we've already kind of seen like destruction with like colonialism and things that happen in that way. So I think the way we see design and the way we see like what's the word, like stress is a little bit different, and we play around with it. Even the way we teach each other how to deal with it. I see so many stressed out students, like design students, and I'm like, it's gonna be fine. Like I'm just kind of rolling with the punches because in the back of my mind, I know there's something crazy that's happened to like my family in the past or like generations. So it's kind of again a perspective thing that we don't talk enough about in design. Like we talk about like user experience, but we don't really talk about perspective in that way.
Right. And I think that gets into this more native perspective being present and modern. And you talked about, I think in the interview that I read, that a lot of people talk about native people as like in the past or not even existing presently. So by that extension, like if we were to overcome that, we might be able to tap more into those solutions or that perspective, but we're just acting like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, some of these things, these solutions, they come up. Oh, I sat in on this lecture once, and I don't mean to badmouth anyone or like think poorly, but there is this lecture. I was sat there for a whole hour and I was scratching my head because this woman was like, and at the end of it, we found out this area floods and we shouldn't build houses there. And I kind of looked at the person next to me and they were like, does it seem like people might have known that and not have built there for a reason? Like it would, for me, that would be like common knowledge. Like I would get spanked or something for not knowing that answer. But when research is done and they see like, oh, this is exactly what happens, it's kind of like that was observed previously by people who had inhabited that area. Again, no ill will to like researchers currently because they're very important, but it's kind of like, why didn't we already think about this? Like there's a reason why.
Right. And I think it's an interesting transformation happening on that front in terms of like the credibility of this knowledge in our own area here in the Pacific Northwest. I think that manifests with like our utility company, our local energy company, like consulting more with the tribes regarding like our hydroelectric energy. And that's like been contentious for at least decades, right? And this idea of like the impact that it has environmentally, it's a huge trade-off to have hydroelectric because it's cheap, plentiful energy, but it's affecting our ecosystem. It's affecting the salmon population and things like that. And it's only recently that there's been, I'm seeing it framed as a collaboration. Do you think that that's something on the horizon that's happening?
I think over the past, I would say like decade, there has been a huge rise in like collaborative efforts. Where I think it fails, I've noticed a trend that we really put emphasis on like one person from the community. Like I'm really happy to be here, but I'm one person. Like I can't represent all of Native America. Like I'm a desert native. What do I know about like fishing? Um, but I do listen to the people of Juneau. I do listen to the natives of the Pacific Northwest. We do have a lot in common. So I think yes, collaboration is great, but actually like collaborating with a community versus just like one person is even better. I mean, I think that's something we also learn in design school where people don't always like go to that solution. They're like, I met with one person and this is how it is. But you see with really great products, they like met with several people. So I think it's the same kind of concept. Like one interview is great, but like having more people to know and have like a wealth of knowledge, like a big database of knowledge would be even better.
Right. So some updated practices and design research and perhaps even co-design, which seems to be a bigger and bigger concept as time goes on.
Right. Co-design is really interesting. I think it's like an interesting topic.
Yeah. Have you done a lot of co-design?
Yeah, I think I have. I want to say I have. Part of co-designing is like removing some ego. And I know ego is a big thing in design. Until you start like kind of removing some of those, I don't say they're toxic because you do need to flex sometimes, especially when you're trying to network and product and like build products. But co-designing, you really have to take the back seat with each other. You have to sit in the back seat with each other, essentially. And so I think it's really interesting that we're leaning towards that when this practice has been super like traditionally focused on like one person. Or, if you even think about like Charles and Ray, you think about they had a whole studio and a firm, but who do we know? What names come out of this? So I think co-design is like new. I think we've heard of it and we probably have done it, but to actually put it on a pedestal and like give recognition is kind of interesting to me.
So in terms of like reducing ego in the process and like kind of practicing better co-designing, what are some strategies to utilize? Do you have any?
Oh, yeah, totally. Again, it comes down to communication and just like listening to someone else. There's this practice I heard of like active listening versus like passive listening. Part of it is like trying to be an active listener, not just being like, oh, yep, I wrote your idea down and that's great. Or let me maneuver this the way I feel comfortable, because it's part of it is just hearing the other people you're working with and like being uncomfortable. No one wants to be uncomfortable, but like for people who come from different backgrounds, not just like the ones that are mainly designed for, it's a comfortable space to be uncomfortable. Like that's probably like a weird saying. But yeah, I think that's like the first and foremost like part of it is being like, let me hear what you got to say.
No, I totally get that. That makes sense. Gotta just sit mired in discomfort sometimes.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how to frame this question, but it's very, like interesting to me to imagine pulling from a whole community or like lifting up a whole community to do a design, right? And yet because the Western like structure of design is so mired in one person representing each thing that gets made, do you think like what would have to change to give a whole community of people's impact like the same recognition or pedestal in terms of like celebrating the thing that they made? Design is not very good at like not pointing to one person and being like, wow, look at them.
I think it would be like patience and a little more empathy. We always joke that if you give like a Native person, particularly a Native man, a microphone, they're just going to tell you about everything that happened in their past, including like the high school basketball game they almost won. Like I was almost a winner. But I think there's a lot of practice and like patience, which isn't always a thing in design because we have deadlines. Like how many times have you had a deadline pop up on a Friday and it's Wednesday and they need this done quickly? In like ceremony, you always give dues where they're due. It's like a practice of saying, this person brought this person came here. You recognize each individual as a community. And because of like lack thereof time, I think that's something that's missed out. So I think patience and just like more time. And it's like almost the exact opposite of what you get in working in the design industry. But I think once people start kind of doing that practice of like acknowledging each person for their contribution, then we're probably going to continue on with this one person, one design philosophy.
Yeah, that was honestly one of the things I was thinking of with, and I think people fear this with co-design, with better collaborative efforts, is when you sort of decentralize project effort in that way, you definitely introduce the idea of design by committee, which is a quality concern, and this idea that things will take longer because you have to listen to everyone and because you have to talk about more things being contributed, which I think we would say that can result in better outcomes, but it will definitely take a little bit longer to untangle. And that's not super, amenable to the, capitalist system as it is right now, right?
Totally. And I've sat through I sat through a 8-hour ceremony a few weeks ago for these totem poles we're raising because every person had to talk. Every clan representative had to talk. Was it long? Yes. Was it raining? Yes. Was it cold? Yes. But like, it was so important. That's how like longevity happens for community. We could remember one person for one thing, but do we want to remember one person in like 200 years, or do we want to remember a community? And that's what I have to think about when I design.
You're just making me think. I feel like I can't keep up with the pace of like reactions of like interest I'm having.
It's like a really different feel. When I entered like an actual fully design program where it's like you are in design school and here's the official stamp, it was really interesting to me to see just like the way other people thought when they kept talking about like user experience and interviews and community. I was like, yes, about it. But in practice, it doesn't always come out as like clear. And that's something I've had to like modify in my design practices. Like I told you guys, I've joined 2 fellowships. They're both wrapping up in the middle of this year. And the only reason I, kind of hop back into more like a corporate kind of setting or an institutional kind of setting is because I wanted to learn more, and not necessarily like I want to be a designer for this person or this particular brand, or I want recognition with this group. But it was more so I could go back and learn and develop myself, because I think I could just go and be a industrial designer here or a UX designer here. I think I'd be successful in that way. But for me as like a native thinking person, I went to learn and to grow and explore. So like my reasoning for going back to these kinds of practices is a little bit different than from like what a normal undergraduate or a graduate student might try to do, just go and get a job. So I think that's part of it too.
Right. Although I also do feel like for you, learning comes with a very healthy amount of evaluation and skepticism, because you are aware that there are things that you don't know how to do that you can learn in design school. And yet, as you're pointing out to us, design falls flat in a lot of ways. Like, I think user experience is a great example of us thinking, so often as designers, thinking that we are like the least corporate of the corporate world because we really, really care about the person that we're making something for more than the money, right? But yeah, we're missing the mark in a big way on that. So how do you, when you're in school and you're getting sort of taught these big, broad lessons, pick out the parts that you can really apply to what I would say is like a more thoughtful perspective you have already?
I don't know. Maybe it's like a spidey sense or something. When something feels off, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I should go there. Like there's something in me. It's not like a scared feeling, but there's a feeling where I'm like, I don't know. And I'm not a person to say I don't know. And I think a lot of women feel this way, where we're very confident, we're very organized, we're very smart. Like I think women just in general, because we're so aware of our surroundings and maybe have had to care for your siblings or cousins or nieces in the past. But I think there's something in us that says, okay, we know how to do this, and we do it. But then when we don't know, I think there's something there to question. And rather than just go with the flow, I think tapping into that I don't know, rather than being like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing. Going into like thought mode and saying, why don't I know? Or like, why does this feel uncomfortable? Again, sitting in that uncomfortable, like questioning the uncomfortable.
That's interesting. I think it can definitely, there's a tendency, I think it's from socialization, and I think it can be like, it can lead us to overthink.
Absolutely.
But it can also be like productive thinking. It can be the proper amount of thinking where others would, I guess, be thoughtless, right? Yeah, I think it'll always be this struggle of like, am I overthinking that, or do I need to think and question and that this is the right thing to do? And that's kind of there's a tension there. I think here, like what we're doing right now and talking about this is hopefully like going to help, because we can like air this out, and other people who are doing this silently in their head, like you were probably doing this like for yourself, to yourself. I don't know if you had anyone to soundboard to on WID here. Like I feel like we soundboard this sort of thing to each other more and more, but a lot of us, not just women, but like designers, people everywhere should do this to tell each other like, I don't know about that. What did you think? And maybe we might find more often that like, oh, other people felt the same way, that like, that was weird. Let's deconstruct that.
Yeah, totally. I actually when I went to graduate school, I had a few more than I'm used to having women in the classroom. I had a few good friends who I could kind of like give that like what happened or what was just said kind of glance at each other. And just like even looking at someone else's facial expression was super helpful for being like, okay, that sounded crazy. We're just gonna like put that in the back of our brain for when we need it. But we're gonna keep moving forward and just kind of like let that marinate. And toss it out maybe if it goes bad. But there are times when I definitely was like, I can't believe that person just said that. But you kind of just have to keep moving. But having validation, or even like writing it down, being like, why did I feel like ick? Or I don't know, because that's not where my brain is most of the time.
Right. Even to be aware of it. I think it's so socialized to sort of immediately move past it or downplay your reaction or whatnot. It's very, I love the amount of grace that goes into sort of like just acknowledging it, knowing you're going to come back to it, but knowing that like your intuition is very significant and that you've been taught well and that you like really do know what your community values are, what your values for yourself are. Have you felt like that for most of your life, or do you feel like this is something that you've had to also work hard on in your own perspective?
I think there was like a great awakening at one point in my life where I know when I was younger, I knew certain things. Like I know some people also get they question themselves about their intelligence, but that's something I've never done in my life. I've always been like, I'm incredibly smart. Like
Hell yeah.
Just telling myself that. And that probably sounds really really awful, but I knew as a kid I was smart. Like, no, I had a comeback for adults. I could beat adults at checkers and crazy eight. So like there was nothing in my mind that was like, you're dumb. Like no one ever called me dumb either. Just like I knew it.
That does not sound awful. That sounds fantastic.
So I hope like any woman listening to this podcast, if they know they're smart, they just like live and die on that hill that like you are so smart. But like it wasn't until like I would say like college that I actually started acting like that, where I was like yes, I know what I'm doing. And yes, this feeling I'm feeling is something that my intelligence is telling me to like be wary of. Before I would just kind of sit there and just like, yeah, okay, great. And just muddle along. But once I started to kind of gain confidence in that like intellect, like this feeling you're feeling is not just like a feeling. It's coming from somewhere in your brain that is a very smart brain. And you need to listen to it because it's going to like keep you up at night or it's going to haunt you or something. Yeah, I think during college is when I started to say, yes, I have issues with what's happening and I need to speak up or I need to like find a moral compass based on this interaction.
I think I met some people at the conference that expressed to me indecision or like discomfort with having that feeling of like, this is what I know. And like, I know what I'm perceiving and I trust myself. I trust my perceptions, but I don't know how to act on it. It's one thing to have that feeling and know you're right, but then another to put it into practice, whether that's calling people out or just not shrinking when you're questioned, being persistent, being resilient. And like for a lot of us, it feels like a box that you're pushing against. That maybe there is like some forces against us, right? We're kind of swimming upstream. There's sort of, you got to stick your neck out a little bit, you know?
Totally. I love that you said resilient because, okay, this is coming from a native brain again. We are taught, it is in our blood to be resilient. And I think that's what I carry into these like spaces where I'm a designer and I have to be not necessarily right, but I have to feel credible about what I'm doing. And I think that plays into like my like audacity maybe to like push against that box you talk about. So I hope anyone who feels like out of place, I hope they like use that and get comfortable again and comfort in that discomfort place so that every uncomfortable position just feels like they can handle it. Because once you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you start to get confidence and you start to understand like risks and like reward when you push back.
So I think that it's like it sounds like a muscle that you're flexing.
Yes.
Do you feel like there's times where, because I think there's in the grand scheme of whether it's work-life balance or self-care and things, we talk about when you don't need to do these things. And like it can be exhausting to flex that muscle like all the time. You're not flexing it like all the time, are you? Do you rest it? And how do you do that?
I go in my shower and I cry.
Oh
No, I'm just kidding.
no.
I'm just kidding. I think part of it is like that listening portion where like I don't need to know everything, but I need to hear what everyone has to say. And that's definitely a time to like reflect. I think there's a time to like flex and a time to reflect. And I think in that reflecting space is a good time to like reset. If you think about even like meditation, there's different forms of meditation. I think one is like active listening, just like listening to what someone else has to say, because then you don't have to do the thinking really. You just kind of have to like retain.
So the method of like when you're listening to someone and you kind of take that step back, if they're saying something that is like way out of line, if someone's like just being whack and maybe they did like disagree with you strongly and it's kind of an attack, like can that still be a time where you're reflecting and perhaps recharging somehow, or is that just a time to like get away? I don't know.
I mean, maybe it's where you are in your journey of like confidence. There are definitely times people will just like talk to talk. And so you just kind of be like, okay, great, just nod along. Because sometimes you're talking to a brick wall and you have to realize that that's part of that, like understanding who your audience is. And so those times like retreat, just, yep, you're right, I'm wrong. And the project's still mine. So I'm going to keep going forward in how I want to. I'm a person to spiral. I used to be a person who like spiraled just on one thought of someone just hating me or hating my work. I used to be so hard on myself. But then I just kind of had to let it go and be like, I always go back to the pros and cons. Like my boss recently said, a leader is someone who knows your pros and cons. They know the risk. If the risk seems manageable, great. But what like makes a leader is that they have a plan for that risk or they have an answer for what comes along. And I think that's helped me kind of just let those like people who might say something crazy go. It's like, okay, well, you said what you had to do. Do you feel better? And then you just keep moving.
Oh man, I love it. Just, you're in charge.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So have you been able to step into very many leadership roles as you've gone on?
So the kind of design I want to do is not actually like, doesn't really exist right now. I'm actually working on an app and a database development. I know I'm an industrial designer, but I kind of mentioned that I design for my community and what my community needs right now is infrastructure, tech infrastructure. So I'm trying to build this app and database to help make documentation for Native peoples better, specifically my tribe. And I've had to make my own opportunity. And I see myself stepping into leadership more and more with this project. And I feel like I'd only feel comfortable being like a true, like I am a leader, I am a CEO, I am a something of this, if I was truly passionate about it. Like I can be a team leader and help people, help junior designers. I think I've been in that position before, but like to be a true, like I'm a leader in this project, I think I have to build my own project for what I'm passionate about.
And you're saying that leadership comes more naturally at that point because you just have such a strong vision that you're like believing that you are the person that has to see that vision through, like has to collect all of the resources and the people and the work that you need to get it done.
Yes, I think it's more of that kind of how I told you, like we had to build a fence and a scarecrow to, survive, to make this happen. I think it's that same kind of mentality that like erupts in me. It's like, oh, we have to get this done to survive. And I think that's where me as a leader, like I like become like the next level Pokemon, if you can think of it like that, like I level up in that way.
Yeah, because the thing you're working towards, I think it sounds like becomes more significant than even the view you have of yourself.
Yeah.
Like it sort of is the fuel to the fire. That's cool. I feel like that's a very good place to be leading from, as opposed to ego, which you've already explained why that has so many flaws.
I was gonna say my poor husband, like he's so sweet. He's like the biggest woman advocate out there, especially in terms of being a designer. But he's always like, I think there needs to be ego in design. And we just have this fun back and forth about that. So like when I say there needs to be less ego, we play on that a lot. So I don't want anyone to think like they have to throw away their confidence or ego, but definitely like it's something to think about and be playful with.
Can you tell us more about the argument? Like, yeah, both sides a little bit. I'm intrigued.
Okay. So he's a jeweler. I call him a master form line artist, but he would not say he's a master, but a very, very well recognized form line artist. And his thing is about clan representation. And so he says, when you're like in a clan, especially from the Pacific Northwest and like Alaska, you represent, like you throw your crest on everything, like you're the loudest, you dance the hardest, like there's ego there. He's like, in order to do that, you have to have an ego. You have to be willing to puff your chest up and be that way. And he feels like that as a designer. Like he likes to create for clans and for like people. So in his mind, like ego is kind of like present. Whereas me and several other designers who are Native are like, no, we have to take a step back and be humble about this. And he's like, no, let's do it all now. But I guess it's just our perspective on how to see things.
Well, it's interesting too, because the way you're talking about your capacity to stand your ground or know what's right is in line with this level of like self-confidence and connectedness that seems like it could be a version of ego. But I also think you couldn't be curious about all of the things that you need to be curious about to reach that conclusion if your ego was also too strong, right? You wouldn't even let things come through. It's sort of like this membrane of what you're evaluating. So I don't know. It's like we just need more words for ego. Like there's some very good parts of it, right? That give you a lot of drive too, I would say, from the outside. Do you think that's true?
Oh, definitely. I think there's like a playfulness that comes with community too. Like I played basketball a lot and there's like studious Brittany that's just going to get it done and be really intense. But then there's like basketball Brittany or, sports related Brittany where I'm like, I'm going to talk crap at you at the court, but it's not because I don't like you or because of anything like competition wise. It's just kind of the culture in which you can kind of like stomp your feet louder and people understand and accept. And I think that maybe like people don't know how to control between like 0 and 100. And there's a time and place to be a certain way. So I think that's part of it too. Like you're saying, like maybe there is some ego, maybe there's a time and place for it. And maybe there's a time and place not for it. And maybe depending on your role in your community as well.
Right. And sort of his perspective on representing his clan, like that still is community to a degree, right? He's proud of it for himself, but
yeah, that's absolutely community. Like, and maybe that's what we talk about, like the self versus community. Like when you're part of the community and you want to represent, like you're representing, you're out there. Even if you think about like protecting other people or like representing other people, I will go to bat for any one of you. Like just knowing you all and the work you do, I will go to bat now that we become like a community. So maybe it's also that mentality too, like the self versus like community.
What's your take on all this, Ginger?
It's interesting. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of cultural baggage with how you view these things. And so when I think about being American and in a Western culture, it's really individualistic. And I think that's how we get to who's the leader, who's a North Star that's pushing an effort through, and then that person is sort of like showered with, laurels and glory. And then, coming from not that perspective as a Chinese person or an immigrant, and there's maybe some more emphasis on community, on family, on a lot of things that don't get done on your own, and who sacrifices to help you get where you are. And so I see those things as like both existing at the same time, because I have that perspective, but I'm not very Chinese, and then in lots of ways I'm not very American. And it's interesting to be in that position where of course other people on the outside looking in are just going to say things like, you're not this, and then you go to the other side and then you're not this, and so you're neither. And so I feel conflicted, because I feel like I have a very strong sense of self, like you do, and like, this is who I am and this is what I do, and I'm confident in those things. But I also feel like I don't like it when we're overly individualistic, because I think we accomplish things as community. And I see that from a design perspective too. Like, when you're making a large project, if you're working on a airplane, if you're making a movie, there's so many things that like you can't do them by yourself. We're all in community. Our project team is a community. Our family is a community. The people we go to school with, it's a community. So I see it both ways. Like, you need to hang on to who you are, but you need to foster community too. That's how we get anything done.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the grad program, maybe in the context of some of the, would like to understand more about the work that you're doing in this MIT fellowship and the other fellowship that you're in relation to your community's, approach to design.
Yeah. So with the fellowship that I'm in with MIT, basically it's a kind of like a mentorship networking kind of fellowship where we regroup and we talk about resources and we talk about networking and connecting as many people as we can to our projects. And this project actually stemmed from the need from my community. There's currently no one, I don't think, on the Navajo Nation, like who works for the Navajo Nation agency who's like, hey, we need a UX designer. Like, I don't think I will ever hear that. I'm a handful of people who actually talk about that to some like extent, but the project itself is all based on community, and that's the kind of work I want to do. And I know that when I look back in 5 or 10 years, I really want to be proud of the person I am and the work that I'm doing and the work that I've always said I wanted to do. I think sometimes we want to be this designer, we want to be sustainable designer, we want to be like influential designer, but like a lot of us don't actually like hold ourselves to those goals or find projects that actually mean that. And so for this particular fellowship, I put like all my eggs in the basket and I said, we're going to do this. And now I'm here and I'm going to start development actually like this month. And in a year and a half, I'll have a full product designed and developed with myself and the community. I actually started I did about 15 to 20 interviews, and I sat there for an hour with each individual and like let them just spew their truth. And I don't think anyone's ever done that for my community. Like, no one's ever said like, what do you need? What do you want? For them to say like what they actually wanted was probably the hardest part of this project.
Was it something you expected, or completely new findings you didn't know about, even though you are part of the community?
A little bit of both. I knew things were hard, but there are some things I didn't realize were that hard. And it's becoming more evident that like trauma and, just years of generations having to endure certain things really came out. Sometimes these people would talk about specific traumas and how it related to their work or affected it. So that was something that was really new to me. And other things like they didn't have central heating in one of the offices where it gets to like 13 degrees. And I was floored. I was like, is that illegal? And so I could feel myself getting angry during these interviews. But again, it's no one's fault. It's just like the lack of resources. So those are some things I, found.
I was about to ask you if you were like emotional about some of this, because it seems like it would be hard. And then you mentioned that like you were angry about some stuff. It's always a difficulty to be emotional like while you're working, but is that like an additional challenge when approaching designing or approaching research, and like how are you working with that or overcoming it?
This probably sounds crazy, but I don't I'm an emotional designer, I guess, because all the things I've ever made or am interested in have all given me like some kind of sentiment to feel, whether it's like extreme happiness, extreme like sadness. Like I've always felt something towards my projects. And they always say don't fall in love with your projects, and I don't, but I have feelings towards them. And I think that's like a real thing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was cluing into about this idea of attachment to the work. And sometimes I think we're encouraged to extricate ourselves from it somehow, that like that will make the work better, or that somehow it's more credible or something if we do that. But it's not always possible, or maybe it's not even necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I would even take it a step further. Like, what are the drawbacks of becoming emotionally detached?
I also think that comes with maybe like design as it's taught right now isn't taught from like a community or like a different kind of perspective. Like you should have, maybe not you should, but there feelings are allowed. And maybe that's a Western thinking that feelings are going to get in your way, or you're going to get emotional and I don't know, break your computer or something. I'm not sure, but I think maybe there's something there.
We are coming for stoicism. We're going to kill it.
Yeah, I'm sometimes wondering, like, can you make a really good product if you don't care about it? And to care about something, you have to have feelings.
Yeah, I think perhaps you can make something nice, but it's very sterile, right? If you don't care about it. And also that like maybe you don't have a stake in it. Do you have something to lose out on or celebrate in, depending on the outcome of the work?
Well, what if you just care deeply about the people you're making it for, right? I mean, that's definitely true for this project that Brittany's working on right now. I think, of course, if you're making something, the people you're making it for will be deeply invested in what the thing is, hopefully, right? That's kind of your goal, is to get something that like connects with them. I'm not saying it's possible to be detached from it, but I can imagine sometimes that like your emotions could overshadow the emotions of the people that you're working for, and that could be the pitfall. I don't know how could you keep a pulse on, like you caring about it enough to be interviewing these people in a deep, intentional way, but then still somehow like letting their emotions be the things that are the driver? Or maybe that's just not a disconnected thing, because you should be involved in the communities that you're designing for.
just like a roundabout.
It sounds like the ego conversation again.
I know. Brittany, you're being so patient with our meandering.
No, it's like something to really think about. Again, I think it's that like all or nothing mentality. Like we got to learn how to like balance out that middle as like designers in the Western world. I think I try to be even keel. I really try to be. It's not my greatest strength, and I know it's not my greatest strength. So I like try really hard, knowing that like that's probably going to be my weakness someday.
But it seems like it's been such a strength.
I think it's only a strength because I work on it.
Not letting it get overpowering. Yeah, do you have early memories of doing design work and sort of ever getting too deeply invested into some stance or some detail of the project that you had to work hard to let go of?
Oh my gosh, yes. So my husband and I are both designers. I love him. I keep saying this, I love him, but
Yay.
He and I, because we come from two schools of thought, we really don't design well together, like in terms of like actually sitting down and like let's create. He has a different approach and I do, and so whenever we work together, whatever we make just happens to be like not what we wanted at all, and it's not even useful because we go back and forth so often. So yes, I have been in those moments, or like working with your siblings, at least my siblings. If we're trying to make a fence or something, I probably will get mad. Like, I'll be honest. I'll be like, why did you do that? And I'll start yelling. But again, those are personal people. I would never do that in the workplace.
Man, sometimes you want to.
Right?
So these are the projects that you maybe don't necessarily love.
Exactly.
How many times, like, knowing that you cannot work with your husband, but it sounds like you keep working on projects with him because it wasn't just one situation.
We keep trying.
I think this is one of Margaret's favorite topics is creative couples, how they work together.
Creative couples, yes. I was curious because sometimes people work great together and it's like this team, Charles and Ray Eames, but like it's interesting to hear that you cannot work together, but you still keep trying. It's almost like, is it date night idea that you are like, okay, once again, for the 50th time, now we're making it.
Maybe we'll make a podcast just for that.
Oh my gosh.
I can imagine if like you do some, I don't know, house remodel or like fixing something in a kitchen, and each of you have different idea how to do it. And do you end up calling a professional while you couldn't figure out together what's the best idea to solve the issue?
I think that's how it's gone a few times.
But on the flip side, what do you get out of like the creative part of knowing your husband? You know, just your like way of inspiring each other, even if you don't work on a project well, do you feel like you drive each other in a different way?
Yeah, are you stealing ideas from Jack?
That's what I said.
Time, all the time. I think we're like very yin and yang. We probably should not be doing the same job on a project, but if you gave us different roles on the same project, we do really, really well. So I think that's like something to think about in terms of like creative partners. We give each other ideas. We probably should do a podcast at some point, or like at least record ourselves and see how crazy we sound.
Yeah.
And we just sit and talk about like Indigenous futurism, like why things are the way they are, like what ideas should exist but don't. Like these are all conversations that I feel so confident that we're on the same page about, but we can spew off into two different directions and all our ideas are crazy, but they're really great. And I don't feel like dating a designer can be hard, but I don't feel judged by him whenever I say something crazy. Or again, he has the audacity. I'm so surprised, like all the amazing things he's done, but it's all because he's like, yep, I can do it. Even though he was like, I wasn't really confident, but I just told myself I could. So I get a lot of confidence from him. And he like supports me that way. So I think that's part of it too, just like being each other's support.
That sounds really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think you're generating a future runway of work? Like, do you have an endless fount of ideas? When you're done with these fellowships, you know you have something to move on to work on next?
Again, this is where I'm going to sound like my ego. She has an ego. I actually talked to one of my advisors and I tell her, like, I'm not afraid to like be fired. I'm not afraid to like lose my job. I honestly think there's enough work out there in my community that needs to be done that I'll always find a way to do it or have a job or a role in my community, whether it's in like graphic design or whether it's as a pure industrial designer or as a UX designer. There's always so much need here that I can find work to do. So again, not to like toot my own horn, but I feel really confident in that, that I can find myself a space to be like important or like helpful.
We want you to toot your own horn. Your community is really lucky to have you. Wow. Can you talk a little bit about the process of applying for these fellowships or grants or, you know, ways to get these projects that you have sort of endlessly coming up in your mind across the line into reality so that you really get to work on them?
Yeah, something that I like want to teach a class on this, like this topic, especially for like any kind of freelance designer, in terms of like how to apply, what to do. A lot of times people are afraid to freelance, but I think there's so much growth and freedom within freelance and learning about yourself and how you function. One of the things that I cannot like scream loud enough is like, you need to network. You need to go out there and shake people's hands and say, hello, this is who I am confidently. Because if you go into a conversation and say, hi, I'm Brittany, I think I'm a designer, or like, oh, I'm still learning about design. That's not going to get you the job. That's not going to like give you kudos in the afterlife. It's not. Like, you really have to go out there and say, yes, hi, my name's Brittany and I'm a designer. Like, you have to do it with your full chest. And I was telling someone else at the conference, I was like, even if you just have like a folder in your iPhone that says projects and it's just a bunch of images or graphs, or you want to show someone, pull it out and say, this is, 3 or 4 pages of your work. Like, oh yeah, this is what I do, because people are very visual. So networking, just getting out there and being like courageous and saying, yes, this is what I do, is like the first step. And like the second step is go on LinkedIn, go on people's websites, look at what people are doing. Like, if you want to apply for the fellowship I'm in, go to mitsolve.com and see what's available. Go to, I'm at Arizona State University at a fellowship there. Go there and look up what the fellowship is. And like, don't be afraid to apply, because when they say that there are people who are unqualified, not in like a mean way, but there are people who are not very qualified applying for these things, and they're going to get the position if you don't apply for these.
How did they first come across your radar? Was it because of networking and relationships that you'd already built?
Sometimes I keep I'm super nosy. I want to know what's going on all the time. So I just go on different portals and I'll just search design or just random things just to keep tabs and know what's going on. I don't think people realize the industry has patterns. And so, for instance, with layoffs and stuff, if that's happening at different places, you probably should keep tabs on where it's happening and who's hiring and why are they hiring. So I just go on random sites. I was on Arizona States and I just typed in design and I wasn't looking for a fellowship, but there was an opportunity. So I kind of read into it and they're actually right up my alley for this app I'm building. So I applied and I got it. It's mostly just me going out on the internet and just looking and also looking at other people who are similar to me. I'm a woman designer, I'm Native. Unfortunately, there's algorithms who can predict this, but I just go down those rabbit holes and find it that way.
Some Google foo involved.
Yeah, algorithms, they're there for a reason. But yeah, I think those are the big things. I think people also are just afraid to apply. One of the biggest things I think about is you can always say no. You are a treasure. You are something to be found and negotiate with. Do not forget that. You have skills. You probably have a degree if you're listening to this podcast or gonna get one. Know that you're that person and you're super worthy of these positions. So go and then say no to some of them just because you can. So I think that's part of it too. Just knowing that you're also an equal coming to the table.
How's preparing the application for the grant? Is it a lot of work and preparation? Is it your portfolio and the proposal? What you would like to bring to the opportunity if got one?
Okay, so for design focused stuff, for zeroing in on that, you're going to have to write a few essays, but there's ChatGPT. Always check your work. Always check your work. But no, I'm kidding. But you'll have to write something about your project or why you're interested. You probably should have an interest in what you're applying for. And then to have some kind of portfolio ready. My biggest thing is I always have something on hand, a deck of some sort. I know that sounds super corporate, but that's this language people speak. If they're either reading it or they're show me a picture. Those are the two main things. And honestly, grants seem more crazy than they are. I had someone ask me 2 days ago, how do you even be with an organization who does grants? I'm you can just do it yourself. As one person, you can be a sole proprietor and just apply for funding as needed and just have your written portion ready.
That's wonderful advice. Wow. Yeah.
Grant writing's no joke, though. It's a lot of work.
Do you right now, I mean, you're obviously in the middle of some substantial projects, but do you also have a list ready of the next, 5 things you'd really love to do?
Yeah. There's a lot of just random stuff I like to do. I'm actually taking so my family weaves are traditional Navajo weavers. So I am a weaver, but my husband's people are also weavers, but they do it absolutely different, 100% upside down, different from the way we weave. So I was recently adopted by one of the tribes here after I got married to my husband, or the clans out here. And I'm learning to weave their style, to use their natural dyes from this area to actually dye wool and learn how to make blankets. I'm probably not going to be very good at it, but I think that's the first step of learning, to be in a community again, is to get familiar with what's available, natural dyes and how processes are done. I'm a desert native, so it's very different from being a cold Alaskan native, but it's important to me to become knowledgeable about that kind of stuff. So that's something fun that's on my list of things to do. Another thing is I want to get back to designing apparel just because I enjoy it. And it's crazy to think about making for enjoyment because we don't always get that luxury. And I think those are the 2 main things on my bucket list. My husband's actually going to be at Swaya, which is a big market, Indian market is what it's called, in Santa Fe, New Mexico in August. And I actually get to help him plan his, because he does jewelry, accessories, prints. So I get to actually help him CAD and do some jewelry work, sew some leather. So that's pretty fun too. So very, very industrial design type stuff as well.
Yeah, very cool.
When you said about being adopted by the tribe up north, it's gonna be silly, but my first thought was you coming from Arizona to Alaska and finding new friends. It was like Bella Swan moving to Forks in Washington.
I didn't jump off any cliffs though.
Oh, so you watched it. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I'm very familiar.
Yeah, are you a werewolf as well?
I mean, my husband might think so. That's funny. I feel I reference that movie way too often.
It's an interesting cultural point. Like, it's just referenced everywhere. But in our podcast here, we rely on Margaret for the references.
They don't know what I'm talking about.
Only vaguely.
Dang, I dropped for a minute. Did you ask her about Twilight?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my god.
Team Jacob or Team Edward?
That should be an easy one.
Margaret!
Should be a very easy one.
Very easy.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh,
I
man,
was
that's
not
very
originally a Twilight fan. My best friend from high school was like, we should start a book club since you're going to college and we can read a book and, we'll talk about it. And I was like, great idea. And she just kept picking Twilight over and over. So she'd pick Twilight and I'd be like, okay, I read it. And we'd have these conversations. And I was like, this book is like kind of out there, Summer. And she's like, no, it's good. It's good. And I'd be like, okay. I'd pick a book and then she would pick the next book. And so I ended up reading the series because my best friend was like, I'm taking you down in this one with me.
Oh, that's so funny.
Oh.
And you guys were having like in-depth, like intellectual conversations about
Like
Twilight.
Oprah's book club. And I was like, Summer.
Oh, that's a sweet way to stay close, though.
Yeah, we did a lot of weird things. I think I signed her up for wrestling at one point
Oh,
in our
wow.
high school. So it was like an even trade-off. Like she joined the wrestling team with me and then I joined the Twilight book club with her.
Dang, that's really funny. I had a question about the weaving that you were talking about. Do you like learn just totally two different techniques and it's very significant to keep the like integrity of the techniques? Or would you ever mix your, backgrounds and pieces of knowledge to make something?
I would totally mix. And
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people could do that. There's actually a discussion happening right now with a very famous weaver. Her name's Lily Hope from the Tlingit tribe. And she's talking about people who come here who are maybe non-native or from a different tribe and learn their style and start calling themselves like chilkat weavers or like raven's tail weavers, which to me sounds crazy. I know I was adopted and I'm here and I'm living the life, but I would never like call myself that the same way. Like if I were a graphic designer, I would never be like, I'm a graphic designer and I also design like footwear. Like if I was not truly like a footwear designer, I would say I know how to design shoes from a graphic standpoint, or I have the skill set to do this, but I would never identify as that specific kind of like designer. Same way I would not like identify as like, I am right now a chilkat weaver. That just seems like intrusive on someone's identity. But if I ever got to the point where I was good at it, I would always identify like, I am a Navajo weaver who does this style. And there would be like some formality of like acknowledging it. But I would absolutely blend and mix them because I like doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's very cool. What are ways that you could blend them that would keep like the necessary parts of both styles?
So chilkat weaving is very different in that, I don't know if you're familiar with warp and weft when it comes to like soft goods, non-stretch material.
Yeah.
So they actually have a warp that hangs and is actually not attached. It's loose. It's like fringe from the top. And they almost like braid it from the top down is what it feels like. Versus Navajo weaving, we have a tight warp and then your weft is just in and out across and you move upwards. So it'd probably have to be like sewing those two together or like finding a way that they meet, because it's almost impossible to do each of them on the same like loom because one is like loose and the other one is very, very tight. So it'd have to get like prototyped and function differently.
Aside from the technical difficulty of merging those two things, are there ever people or is there a mindset of like, no, you shouldn't mix things, or is it really generally welcome?
That's absolutely a fantastic question to ask at this point. I think people from my generation are really open-minded and we want to push for innovation within our cultures. And I'm a person who accepts the change very easily because I like envision a future for like people's kids and people in my tribe and, just women designers in general. So there are some people, maybe my generation and older, who are very like, nope, this is how it is and how it's going to be. And this is traditional. But I really like to challenge what's actually traditional versus what's actually like culturally relevant, I guess, because cultures, I think, need to change and grow to be like a healthy culture. So if we were like on a parallel timeline, but we didn't diverge into like losing a lot of culture, I think our culture would have changed and it would have grown. So I do like to push kind of that envelope. My aunt said it at my wedding, actually. I made my wedding dress like 2 days before my wedding. I planned on doing it earlier, but I did it, and I did it in like a traditional kind of Navajo style, but I added like these massive sleeves. I didn't do 3 tiers. I had like just a lot of different parts and pieces. And I actually put mother of pearl like beads on my like sleeves that went all the way to the floor in honor of my husband's tribe. But I also did it in my own style as a Native person. So I think it's like an interesting space to play in. And I think it's necessary. But there are definitely people who are like, nope, that is wrong. And I'm there to fight back.
Fight the good fight.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by them, mixing between Native cultures that you're talking about right now and how innovative that is. Also, how you feel like it extends out into the outside world, like when and how you feel it's appropriate for companies to work with Native artists and develop products, when that has sort of gone wrong and why. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, no matter what kind of designer you are, no matter what kind of background, pay your designers. Pay your designers. Do not ask people to do things for free.
Yeah.
First and foremost. So if you're working with a Native designer, they're just like any other designer. Pay your designer, because a lot of times Native people are asked to do the work for free or in honor of, or for some kind of like charity, which is fine. We give to our communities all the time. But I think if it's like a corporation or something coming in asking for something, they should pay their designer, acknowledge them, and also be like really respectful of what is being created and what is asked. In terms of like mixing things, I think I have the ability to mix things because I am in my husband's culture. They've accepted me. They see me as a Thunderbird clans person, and I'm very much a Navajo person. So I think that's accepted because there was like a ceremony, there was acceptance, there was like this adoption of community in my life. And I'm never going to like abuse that. Like I would never sell a raven's tail or like a weaving I did in the Tlingit style. Like that would never occur to me. I would give it away or gift it or, not make a profit off of it. But in that same sentiment, I think that companies need to be like forthcoming when they create things. So mixing like Hopi and Navajo designs, like unless you have a Hopi and Navajo designer collaborating, don't think that's the best idea. But I think if you do have a representative from each community creating, totally like go wild, like make it the biggest, most amazing thing you've ever seen in your life.
That's interesting what you said, that you wouldn't sell a work that you were taught as a part of the new community. Let's say one of the blankets just looks stunning and you did a great job and it's in the style, but you wouldn't feel okay to take money for it.
No.
If someone wanted to just buy it as a really good blanket, which represents all these things,
I don't think so. Like that would never like cross my mind. Like I know it like takes hours to learn and be really great. Like it'd take, several years for me to be a great blanket artist. And at that point, maybe I could consider myself worthy of payment, but that would never cross my mind. Like as a Native person to be like, let me make money off of my husband's tribe. I don't know. It's just something I've been like born, like taught with.
It's like an authenticity thing.
Yeah, because you inherently see it as so much theirs. Like you're borrowing even when you've done all of the work to create the thing, right?
Absolutely. And I think something people overlook and maybe don't always think about is when like Native people create, especially my husband's tribe, they call it clan property. So they call it, there's like a term called atwu, which also can mean, I think I might butcher this, but it also means like clan property, but with the ancestors. So like the things you make are spirits. They're not just objects. And maybe that's where like, if we go back to that emotion and thought is put in the things we make. Again, creating something, you're bringing something to life almost as, I don't want to say birthing it because that sounds weird, but you are creating something and that's like really magical in that way. So for me to be like, oh, I made this and then profit off of it seems weird to me.
Let's make another thought experiment. You're like, without a job, the only thing you can do is blankets, and you make Navajo blankets, but you are in Alaska and you want to sell them there. How would it be seen?
They would be like, make that money. They would throw money at me and everyone would be happy.
Okay.
But I think that's interesting to discuss like the context of the object that especially people outside a community might be missing, and that's going to happen a lot with Native art. I don't think people are thinking of objects in this sort of kind of living way or with ancestral context or tribal context. They just see an object, which is maybe where some of this confusion is resulting from. But I think it's very common in a bunch of different cultures to treat objects with a certain sentimentality or emotion that goes beyond like this is a thing with a utility, and then maybe that's why we wouldn't accept payment for them or part with them easily or whatever it was, because that would be inauthentic to the context of the object. Like, it's not a product, but it is a thing that was made. Is that maybe like where we're going with that?
I think so. I think you hit it right on the head with how that's seen, like a product versus like an actual being.
Like a creation.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is there a responsibility, like, when these things are made as products for, like a relatively mass market, like, do consumers need to be educated about that? And whose responsibility is it to do that? Is it like consumers should learn it, or companies should inform them?
Okay, I think recently there's been a big movement for like Native artists and Native people to recognize that we do live in like a consumer world and people do want, their art. And I think when people make now, they're now conscious of that. So they create things that are not sacred, but are still of our culture, because there's a big difference between being sacred versus being in the culture. For instance, my husband's company, Trickster Company, they create for that market for people who want to come to Alaska, have authentic things, but they are not selling, clan crusts. They're not selling, atu, like things from the ancestors. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. Eighth Generation out of Seattle does that. They do a beautiful job of curating an array of Native artists. So I think that market is there and it's being developed more and more every day. But I think when other people just take, like, again, not trying to be hateful, but sometimes museums in the past have taken things from Native people, bones, hair, important ceremonial objects, and they just don't return it. I think there's a big difference between like we're coming to you, paying you, and letting us experience your culture from how you want to experience versus taking and just running with it.
Right. It's like if the creators can determine the terms by which this product is purchased, had, consumed, whatever, that is more legitimate than the alternative.
Yeah. One time, my husband and I went to a bar in Phoenix, and he has his whole right arm done like in a style, form line style that he did himself and had tattooed on. And he has this little beak of a raven popping out on his hand. So if you wear a long sleeve, you always see that beak. And we were sitting there, and this guy runs up to him in the bar and grabs his arm and rips the sweater all the way up. And he's like, "Oh my God, are you from Alaska?" And it was a non-native person. He let us know he was not native. And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I do art just like this. And my brother and we do art like this." And we were just kind of like, this is the most weird inner.
Oh,
I know.
that is so
we don't want to be
cringy.
mean, obviously,
Oh, God.
like they're excited about art. So we just kind of like, "Okay, Rico, you were showing too much skin." We just make fun of it at that point because it's like really intrusive for someone to grab you, pull your sleeve up, tell you that they do your art form. But it's interactions we have like this that make us want to create for people who are excited, but also like trying to give them a lesson. Like, it's probably not the best practice to be doing this.
If someone really likes the native style and would like to get a tattoo, do you think like getting a tattoo by the native tattoo artist is okay? Or should we just keep it, okay, that's not my culture, you wanna get a tattoo, find something more relevant to you and don't try to, I don't know, like steal heritage, not understanding its meaning?
I think if you are friends with a native artist, if you're, connected to that and it has a meaning, sure. Like, and it's not something like a clan, like again, clan crest or, something sacred to that extent. I'd be open to that. But there are some people who get like the blue tattoos on their chin, and those are reserved for certain people in the community, like really powerful women or women within the community. Those I think are like completely off limits. But if your friend is a tattoo artist and you care deeply about this subject matter and it's not just like, "Oh, I got a cool like tribal tattoo," I think that's like acceptable. Like, there's ways of honoring and being respectful. But if you're just like, "I saw this and I liked it, I'm going to get it on," maybe you should like have little more attachment, just like a little bit more. Cause I know tattoos for some people aren't like super important. But there are a lot of Native people all over the world who believe they are. So just being mindful of that would be important.
Yeah, and don't rip people's sleeves in the bars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Try not to touch other people in bars.
Just in general. Oh, man. It's been really fantastic talking to you, Brittany. I think it's a good time maybe for us to start winding down. And I'm really actually thrilled because in this conversation, I think you've done a really amazing job already of knowing your strengths and being able to tell us about them. But we do always ask the guest to find something that makes them really unique, the reason why they really need to be at the table, and what they bring that nobody else has. So we'd love to hear what you think that is for you.
Why I deserve to be at the table. I once, okay, again, not tooting my own horn, but I once had a mentor tell me that I walk the line of being a Native person in the modern world really well. And I didn't understand that until I started embarking on projects that were not just Native centric. And the reason I say that is because I do work on projects based in Africa, designing for African populations, which might seem like really crazy because I preach about designing for community. But what I've been able to do in this project is also elevate up and coming designers. I've also been able to connect with people who maybe aren't designers and help them see their vision through. And I think that's what I do really well in terms of like being a unique designer is I know how to like balance that. Like, okay, we're in like a corporate setting, we're using technology, a place where Indigenous people have not always been in freely and confidently. And I think that I connect those two bridges really well in that way. And I'm not of African descent, but I do my best because this project does need a designer, and they're not currently anyone's on staff with them. So I do my best effort to connect with every single person I can and interview them and question them about what designs work best and what their audience does. I try to be a tool to elevate and like help each other. So I think that's why I deserve a spot at the table.
Okay, and one more question. What's your favorite color?
Yellow.
Ooh, that was a fast answer.
Yellow.
I had a horse growing up. My family grew up in the rodeo. I had a horse and his name was Baby Dude. I named him myself and he was a Palomino. So Palomino yellow is actually my favorite yellow.
Oh, that's so nice.
That's a fantastic answer. Also, I don't think we've ever got yellow before.
That's a new one,
actually.
What's the most common answer?
Well, actually, I was going to say black and gray, but no, actually.
We had two different blues. We've got pink. What? Did we get pink twice?
I think we've had pink and purple.
Yeah.
Like, I think we've had,
Pink and purple.
pink twice maybe.
We got black once, I think. We had white once.
We got orange last time.
Yeah.
I love this question started as like totally a goofy thing the first time, and then we just decided that it's actually really fun.
I started it because it was a joke from Bridget Jones.
Nice.
Oh, we got green ones. The first one was.
The lush green.
We'll have to get a graph going, track the answers.
Do people have reasons or is it just like, oh, I really like this color?
They
Okay.
usually have a reason.
Yeah, yours is the most story specific that I can think of. But people normally do have it connected with some sort of rationale. Or some people are like, oh, it changes, daily. But that's it right this minute. So, yeah. Brittany, I'd love for people to know where they can find you and follow the work that you're creating right now. We didn't actually get to talk a ton about your app, but also, has that launched yet? When will it launch?
So the app is set to launch December of 2024. I'm in the initial phases of just the rebrand of the website and just kind of those outer facing UI areas. And development actually begins this fall. I am creating a team and putting it together. We are looking for funding. If you feel like donating to the cause, please connect with me. But that's hopefully set for December 2024. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Brittany Gene. Also, I have a website that I don't do a good job maintaining, but please feel free to go there and connect with me. I check the emails all the time. And also on Instagram, I'm at _she's thunderstorms. It's a song reference I got over a decade ago, but please follow me there, see some random antics in my stories, and let's have a good time.
Nice. And we can definitely put a link in our description for where people can help fund that project. Do you want to give us actually a brief explanation of what the app is going to accomplish? Because I think it would be amiss for our listeners not to hear what you're working on.
Yes. So right now, the Navajo Nation provides funding for students who want to go to college or vocational school. In this process, you do have to apply online, and also a series of documents have to be provided. Currently, 50% of students who apply, so roughly about 13,000 students apply each year, half of them are immediately denied due to not getting a specific piece of paperwork in. And that's really unfortunate because there's opportunity to be had and funding to be provided to students. However, that's not happening. So my goal is to create a database that houses this process and include a web platform and a mobile application to help connect students and the office together. And it seems really, really minuscule on like a thought process level, like just doing an application. But when you have 13,000 students apply each year academically, it becomes a huge process. And this would be the first kind of big redesign of an agency process that would house data on the Navajo Nation. So that jumps into the topic of data sovereignty, which is a whole nother podcast in itself. But basically, I'd be creating an app to help make this process easier and hopefully connect students to funding resources.
That's incredibly important work. It sounds like we'll just have to have you back to talk again, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me today.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. We are WID_Seattle, and you can find us at the BeyondRayPodcast.com. Brittany, so nice talking to you. Thanks for all the time you gave us today. I really hope our listeners connect with you and learn more about all the work you're doing.
Thank you.